Ever feel like you're shouting into the void trying to get your startup's message heard?
Into the void.
No.
For real, though, getting anyone to listen is like the hardest part.
Right. Today, we're diving into podcasting for tech startup owners, and it's like, they wrote this guide just for us.
No kidding. I was thinking the same thing. Like, it's almost spooky how timely this source is.
Seriously, you've got a killer idea, right?
Yeah.
This whole deep dive is about getting people to actually hear it.
And this source doesn't mess around. It jumps right into how big podcasting is now. Like, over 464 million listeners globally. That's not a niche audience. That's
Almost everyone. I mean, that's a crazy number of people.
totally. It's a mega platform. This source is saying smart startups got to be tapping into this.
Okay, but 464 million people is huge GE. How does a startup even get noticed in all that?
That's where the tech part gets interesting. Your target audience, they're already listening to podcasts.
True. I listen to at least a few each week for sure. More like 5 or 6, honestly.
This source actually says the average is 8 GHT per week. That means
They're already in the headspace for this stuff, and not just passively listening. 8 shows a week means they want to learn.
exactly. Especially in tech, things move so fast. People are craving info.
You're saying instead of fighting for their attention between TikToks and all that, we should meet them where they already are.
Yes. And not just as another voice, but as a trusted source. See, when you host a podcast,
You're not just some random company anymore.
exactly, you're the expert, suddenly.
Ooh, that's good. It's like going from handing out flyers to giving the keynote speech.
Right. Imagine walking into a pitch meeting, and the investors already know your ideas from your podcast.
Instant authority. That's got to be worth its weight in, well, startup funding.
This source says that credibility is priceless. And they're not wrong. But it's not just about sharing your opinion.
So how do we actually use a podcast to build that authority and get to those investors and customers too?
It's all about strategy.
Strategy.
Yeah. Remember how we were saying the average listener's got like, what, 8 podcasts they're into?
8. That was the number. Man, I wish I had that kind of time.
Right. So they're not looking for more noise. They want valuable stuff.
Content tailored to them.
Yes. And that's where being a founder, having that expertise, comes in.
Okay, so less random stuff I think is cool. More like targeted content.
100%. This source breaks it down into reaching different groups.
Customers, investors, even those tech influencers everyone wants to grab.
It's like having different marketing materials, but for your podcast.
Love that. Okay, so let's start with customers. What kind of content gets them hooked?
This source used this example of a fintech startup. Instead of being all, our app is amazing, they did these deep dives.
Deep dives on what? Like how to budget or something?
Even better, the latest trends in their space, like personal finance, but made super interesting, you know?
So you become the go-to source for that knowledge. Then people trust you later when it's product time.
Exactly. And to really prove that expertise, case studies.
People love them.
Case studies. Like,
Yeah.
here's how our products save the day. Yeah. But make it real. This source says people want that real-world proof, especially with tech.
It's one thing to say your AI thingy is great, another to show how it helped a real company.
Huge E difference.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're building trust with customers.
Hmm.
What about investors? What are they listening for?
Ooh, good question. They probably want to know you're not about to tank, right?
That's part of it, but this source uses the term thought leadership. Sounds kind of buzzwordy, but
But it's about showing you get the bigger picture, right? Not just your one product.
nailed it. Share your takes on industry trends, the problems, and no one else is solving.
It's like you're not just pitching your company, you're pitching your whole vision.
And maybe bring in some other experts to back you up.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Having guests on your podcast is smart for so many reasons.
This source points out how interviewing other big names in your field, it adds credibility. CLISS exposes you to their network.
It's like this web of awesomeness. The audience wins, your guest wins, and your startup wins.
Wins all around. Okay, but what about those tech influencers? How do we even get on their radar?
Because everyone's sliding into their DMs, it's got to be tough to stand out.
Tough, but this source thinks podcasting can crack that code.
Really? How so? Just by being like, hey, come be on my show.
It's got to be strategic, both WHO you invite and what you talk about.
Give me an example. Like, what would make an influencer hit that accept button?
Let's say you're building an ethical AI platform, right?
Okay, hot topic these days, I'm following.
You get a well-known AI ethicist on your show. That's valuable content for them to share with their audience, too.
So it benefits them, but their endorsement also makes the startup look good.
And hopefully they tell their followers, go check out this episode, it's fire.
Which brings a whole new wave of potential users, investors. The dream.
Building those relationships is huge E, and podcasting is perfect for that in the tech world.
It's like instead of just being a company, you're building a whole community around what you're doing.
Speaking of community, I love this point from the source, podcasting can humanize technology.
Oh, I feel that. Because tech can be, what's the word?
Impersonal.
100%. Especially with startups, everyone's all about disrupting and stuff.
Right. But people connect with stories.
Sure.
They want to know the humans behind the scenes.
Like our startup journey, the good, the bad, the moments we almost rage quit coding.
Those are the things people remember. It's one thing to say you're passionate. It's another to tell the story of that make or break moment where you almost gave up.
Okay, you've convinced me podcasting is the way to go. But like, how?
Yeah.
Do I just need a mic and a dream?
This source would say you need a little more than that.
A little more. Okay, good, because I only have about $5 to spare right now.
It says, start with your WHY. What's the podcast's purpose?
Yeah.
Investors, customers, both.
Once you've got that down, what's next? So we've got our why. We're ready to bare our startup souls and share the journey. But what about the actual podcast itself? Is it just hitting record and hoping for the best?
This source would say, heck no. It actually gets into different formats. Your podcast could even hey, like, are you thinking solo episodes where it's just you deep diving into your zone of genius?
Ooh, or we could bring in guests, right? Like those industry rock stars we were talking about.
Love that idea. Or even a panel discussion. Get some friendly debate going.
Imagine a whole episode on like the future of the metaverse, but with people who actually disagree.
I'd listen to that. This source is big on finding the right format to keep people hooked. And speaking of hooked, good audio is everything.
Oh, tell me about it. I've tried listening to some podcasts where it sounds like they're recording from inside a washing machine.
The worst. But luckily, you don't need a pro studio these days. There are some seriously good mics and editing tools that won't break the bank. This source even suggests a few.
Ooh, spill the beans. We'll link those in the show notes for sure.
Done deal. Once you've got that tech side sorted, then comes the really fun part.
Making people actually want to listen to what we're saying?
Yes. This source really stresses that balance, going deep on the tech stuff, but not making it so niche that you lose people.
So make it understandable even if you don't have a PhD in AI or whatever, right?
You got it. It's a skill. But this source has some great tips, like instead of saying your tech is revolutionary, show it. Remember those case studies.
A good story beats a boring explanation any day.
Exactly. Okay, so now we've poured our blood, sweat, and tears, and probably some caffeine, into these awesome episodes. How do we actually get them out into the world?
That's the million-dollar question, because what's the point of a podcast if it's just us talking to ourselves? Back to that shouting into the void thing, ha.
Right. This source is all about promoting your podcast because it's not like they just magically appear on people's phones, unfortunately.
Wait, don't. Darn, I was hoping for that magical internet fairy dust.
Sadly, no. You gotta hustle. Social media is your best friend. Think eye-catching posts, maybe share little snippets of the episodes, get people curious.
Build the hype. Make them need to know what happens next.
Exactly. And leverage those connections you made, that awesome guest who was on your show. Ask if they'll share it with their people, too. It's all about paying it forward.
It all comes back to community, huh?
Always. Oh, and this might sound old school in the age of TikTok dances and all that.
Yeah.
But this source is big on email lists.
Email. I haven't checked mine in weeks, but I guess other people do.
For real. People who sign up for your email list, those are your VIPs. They're saying, I'm invested, keep me in the loop.
So give them the good stuff. Early access, exclusive content, maybe even a sneak peek behind the curtain at what our startup's building.
You're getting it. It's about building those relationships one email at a time.
Okay, this is all amazing, but let's be real. Podcasts take time, effort, all that good stuff. Can we actually make money from this, or is it more of a long-term play?
I love that you asked that. This source doesn't promise you'll be swimming in cash overnight, but
it is possible to monetize.
it is. And it goes back to finding your niche. The more specific your podcast, the more appealing you are to sponsors.
Because they know exactly who they're reaching.
Exactly. Oh, and this source reminds us, it doesn't have to be those big buck sponsorships right away. You could do premium content, maybe even sell your own stuff right there in the episode.
Setting up shop where your ideal customer is already hanging out makes sense to me. But how do we even know if any of this is working? Like, what does a successful podcast even look like?
Data is your new best friend. Track those downloads, see how long people are actually listening for. That's Hugh G.E.
So it's not just about getting them to press play, it's about keeping them engaged.
You got it.
Huh.
This source calls it your listen-through rate,
Mhm.
and it's super telling. If people are bouncing halfway through, maybe switch up your format.
Data doesn't lie.
It's true. But also, don't be afraid to just ask your listeners what they think. Feedback is golden.
Sometimes the best approach is just to ask, right?
Exactly. Man, we've covered so much ground today. From what is a podcast to how do we make millions with our podcast.
And everything in between. I don't know about you, but I feel like hitting that record button right now.
Me too. This source was packed with actionable advice. But the biggest takeaway, just start. Seriously, what are you waiting for?
The sooner you start building that audience, connecting with the right people, all that good stuff.
And think about it. Each episode you make, that's valuable content that keeps working for you. It's like building your own little library of knowledge, but in the podcast world.
So if you're a startup founder and you're not podcasting yet, what are you even doing? Go hit record. This deep dive just gave you the roadmap. Now it's up to you to take action.
Get out there and make some magic happen. I can't wait to see or hear what you create.